Good morning to everyone. Today we are going to discuss object-oriented analysis. So the contents in this object-oriented analysis are identifying use cases, object analysis, how the object can be classified. All those things we'll be seeing in this particular object analysis. And the next one is identifying the object relations and as well as its attributes and along with their methods. So what is this particular point is, after identifying a set of objects, we need to identify the relationships for the same objects. So we'll see in detail classification and as well as how the objects can be related with one another in our coming slides. So the first point is identifying use cases. What are the major goals in identifying use cases? So if you look at the process here, the first thing is which we need to identify the actors and along with the use cases, and then later on we have to apply documentation for both the use cases and actors whichever we have identified. So I'll just tell you an example, that is with respect to the analysis. If you look at the slide over here, so there I am showing an image which is a fuzzy set. So if you look at this particular image, there are n number of different colors are there and all are classified. So if you look at here, this particular part is one color and another color and another color. So everything is classified according to its color. So what I'm trying to say is, if these threads are not identified or not classified accordingly with its color, then it will be very difficult to identify. So remember one thing, after classifying, it will be very much easy to analyze what exactly the system is. If you are not identifying, if you are not classifying any set, then it's very hard to analyze the process. So if you look at the definition of analysis here, analysis is the process of transforming a problem definition from a fuzzy set of facts and myths into a coherent statement of systems requirements. So in a simpler manner, we can analyze a problem. We can analyze a problem based on the set of requirements, based on the system requirements. Without analyzing, it is very hard to go into further processes. You can take any case study. If you are going to have any class diagram or any use case diagram or maybe sequence diagrams, whatever the diagram it is, first of all we have to analyze the system and accordingly we have to go with the classifying and everything. All the steps needs to be done. So even if you look at software development life cycle, the first step is analysis. Not only software development life cycle, any kind of process or any kind of step or any kind of methodology whichever we are taking, more or less analysis step will be the crucial step and which will be the very beginning process. And then now coming to the part, what are the main objectives of this particular analysis? So the analysis should be complete. The point which I am mentioning here is complete. So we could not make the analysis only to some extent, because if you are not doing the analysis process in a very detailed and very complete manner, then it leads to unambiguous. It's very hard to identify again. So and also the another thing is consistent. So whatever the analysis which we wanted to do, that should be a complete one. If it is complete, then obviously there will not be any kind of unambiguity in the analysis or in that particular process. And the next one is which is consistent. So these are the three major objectives in order to follow analysis process. And also the other point which I would like to tell you here is what the system must do to satisfy the user requirements and needs. So generally, if you see any system, if you take an example of like some mobiles or maybe some kind of apps, so if you are designing a new app, then if it is approaching to the needs of the user, then the system will be effective and the system will be complete. And again, even though if your system is complete but it is having some kind of ambiguity in the system to process, then also it leads some kind of problems for the users. Now in a detailed process we will see how a system is performing or what kind of things a system is required generally. So I'm just showing you that in the next slide. So where should we start? So we have to start from the scratch. The first one is examining the previous system's documentations, and then we need to conduct some interviews with respect to different groups, and later on we have to prepare some questionnaire, and that has to be circulated among the different age groups. And also the important thing is observation. So whatever the three things which I have told, we need to include observation in all the three aspects. Like even if you are examining the previous systems, or if you are conducting some interviews, or if you are preparing some questions and distributing to the different age groups, whatever the possibility or whatever the scenario which you are doing, for each and everything there should be observation. So without the proper observation, the system cannot be moved into the next stages. So how you are going to examine the existing systems? So you have to collect the data for which they have used and how they have developed, what kind of methodologies they have used. So all those things you have to look and you have to examine the steps very carefully. And then coming to the interviews, you can conduct a different kind of interviews, maybe like one-to-one interview, or maybe you can have some kind of group discussions, or so it's all according to your requirements. And the other, which is very easy one, you can prepare a number of questions where you can have some kind of representations related to your methodology or model. All those things you can put in a web, and you can ask the people to give their answers. You can divide the teams, or you can have some set of groups. So all those things can be done so that the analysis part and with respect to the system will be very much easier. And now coming to the next one, what are the difficulties will be arising while collecting requirements? So that step I am just showing you now. So there are three most common sources of requirements difficulties in every kind of system. One is incomplete requirements, obviously, and second one is fuzzy descriptions, means a fast kind of response. And the next one is, which is also an important element in the requirement difficulties, that is unneeded features. So coming to the first one, which is incomplete requirements, like if you see any kind of systems, they will be facing with some kind of requirements missing, incomplete. Even if you look at any kind of app, like I'm just taking a scenario, like if you want to develop an app for IRCTC, or maybe for library management system, or maybe call monitoring system, anything, or even banking sectors. So if you have to match each and every requirement according to the end user. If you are failing to match a minimum requirement, then it leads to an issue where the people cannot be used that system. And also the other one is fuzzy descriptions. So you have to have a clear kind of response to the end user. And also you should not include the features which are not needed, because if you see some applications where they'll be involving so many kind of applications, so many kind of features which at all not required, but now almost all the cases are being resolved. Now coming to the next one, which is a kind of approach. The approach is, there is an approach called use case driven object oriented analysis. That is a very prominent approach in the object oriented analysis system. So which contains the steps like the actors, identifying actors, and then identifying use cases. So generally, if you're identifying an actor, so that means the external factors whichever interact with the system. So actors and use cases are the prominent elements in this particular use case driven object oriented analysis approach. So because without the actors and without use cases, it is very hard to represent the system. So the actors, different kind of actors will be there. If you take a banking system, or if you take a e-commerce system, where end user will be there, business analyst will be there, programmer and a distributor, analyst, so and then a tester. So these are all a different kind of actors which are involved in a software development systems. And similarly, there are use cases, means whatever the actor is going to perform, that each and every process can be represented as an use case. So if you take any system, obviously there are a number of actors, and the process which are carried out by the actors will be called as use cases. So a number of actors and a number of use cases will be there for each and every system. And similarly, if you look at what are all the steps involved in this object oriented analysis process, so there are steps like, the first one is identifying the actors. That is a first step. And then later on, the second step is develop a simple business process model using the UML activity diagram. Why we are taking UML activity diagram means it is a very easy, and the flow can be represented and everyone can be easily understand. So already I have told that this particular activity diagram is almost looks like a flow chart. And the third one is develop the use cases, and fourth one, prepare interaction diagrams, and fifth one is classification, different types of classifications which we'll see over here, and the last step is iterate and refine the whole process. Now we will see a very detailed discussion on each and every steps of the object oriented analysis, which are 6 steps. So the first one is identifying actors. So any system, as I told earlier, that may be banking or e-commerce or online purchase, or maybe library management system, medical, healthcare, or education, any kind of system, first of all we should know who are all the users. So when you want to design a system, you should be knowing who are all the target audience or who are all the target users for that system to use. So, and that too with the different age groups also, the people will be using the system. If you take an example like the smartphone, like earlier, where the old people are facing little difficulties in order to use the smartphones, and also the applications whatever available in that. But slowly now the system is being easy and everyone started using. That is a second kind of representation. But now the primary thing is you have to identify the actors for the system, whichever it is. So for just like that, we cannot identify the actors for any system. So before that, we need to have a detailed analysis for the system. After having detailed analysis only, we can identify who are all the actors. If you are developing a new system, that is what I have mentioned here, it make sure you have to have a lot of surveys and a lot of interviews with the people, with the public. Then only the process will be very easier. And then second step is develop a simple business process model using UML activity diagram. So if you are having actors and use cases, then you will be knowing what kind of actions will be taken and what kind of works will be handled in the system. So based on that, you can easily develop a business process model by using UML activity diagram. So the points are like this: activity diagrams are graphical representations of workflows of stepwise activities and actions with support for choice, iteration and concurrency. So there are, as I told earlier, there are two types of activity diagrams. One is a general activity diagram where you will be representing all the elements, and then second one is swim lanes activity diagram. So this particular swim lanes activity diagram is especially used to business works or business models, where you will be representing in the column wise representation. So first column will be giving for one particular actions, and second column will be for another set of actions. So those kind of things can be done in this UML activity diagram. So if you look at one more point, in the unified modeling language, activity diagrams can be used to describe the business and operational in a step-by-step workflow of the components of the system. So finally, an activity diagram shows the overall flow of control. Even the other diagrams are there, like use case diagram or class diagram, where you cannot find a detailed flow as like activity diagram. And now coming to the third step, which is developing the use cases. So third step in the object oriented analysis, which is developing use cases. So who are all the users are using the system, are going to use the system, and then if at all if it is a new system, then what kind of use cases are required and what kind of mindset of the users are coming and using the system. Because it's a very important thing when you are designing a new system, you should identify the mindset of the users, what kind of age group and what kind of personalities they are. So you have to think in all the possibilities and then identify the use cases whichever will be using in the system. So that is what I have mentioned here. Use cases provides us the comprehensive documentation of the system under study, because these use cases are very, very important in designing a system. So actors are there, and whatever the actions that are taken place by the users are nothing but the use cases. And now coming to the fourth one, the fourth step in the object oriented analysis, which is prepare interaction diagrams. Like prepare interaction diagrams means sequence diagram and collaboration diagrams. So if you look at an example for this prepare interaction diagrams, I'm just showing here. So this is order applications, and the order is there, and the transaction manager is there, and then order manager again, I mean transaction manager, order manager, and then details of the particular order. So here is a salesperson. So these are all the people who are involved in a system. I've just taken a scenario for order application. So salesperson is the actor, which is a main specific user, and then order applications, and then transaction manager is there, where he is having some set of operations like get information from the order, what kind of orders have been taken place, or what kind of orders have been issued. So all those things will be checked by the transaction manager. And then order manager is the one who will get the different types of orders, what kind of order is saved and where it has to be dispatched, so all those things. And then order application form to order. So application will be sent to the order details, so from which again it goes to order manager and then transaction manager, and finally the order will be placed. So this is how the e-commerce application takes place. This is just an example for our interaction diagrams as I listed in the fourth step. Now coming to the fifth step, which is a classification. So what type of classification is needed in the UML means, I mean, after having a detailed description on activity diagram and then later on interaction diagrams for the system, then we need to have a detailed classification as well. So what we need to do in the classification is, again there are a few steps. One is identifying classes, and after that identifying relationships, and then attributes and its methods. So we have to identify how many classes needed for that particular system, and as well as if you identify class, then it should, obviously you can also identify the attributes of the class and operations or methods of the class. So after identifying classes, then each and every class should have a relation. So for that we need to identify the relationships. As we discussed, the different types of relationships in UML are first one dependency, second one association, third one generalization, and fourth one realization. Even under association we will be having another relationship which is called aggregation along with role and multiplicity. So classification is very important. Even in the beginning of the slide I have told you with respect to a fuzzy set, where I have shown you an image where different set of color threads are there. So that is coming to the fifth step, classification. And now the last step, which is iteration and refine. So if at all, if any bug has found, or if anything is need to be changed in our previous steps, then all those things can be done in the last step, iterate and refine. So if any bug is there, then accordingly it has to be modified in the previous steps, and again the entire process has to be worked out. And similarly, this is a kind of like maintenance. Even I have just represented it in a clear way, like identifying actors is the first step, and then developing use cases or developing a kind of UML activity diagram, business activity diagram, and then the next one is developing use cases, and the next one is preparing interaction diagrams, the fourth one, and then finally you can come up with the classification and iteration process. In a simpler way, I have just shown you here what are the various steps involved in the particular object oriented analysis process. Now coming to the use case model, what are the various use case models are there and which will be feasible in order to use the system. Now I'll just show you some of the points over here on the use case model. Use case are the scenarios for understanding system requirements, and also it defines what happens in the system when a use case is performed. And then the use case model tries to systematically identify users of the system and therefore the system responsibilities. So these are the three major points which are need to be represented under use cases. So as I told in the previous slides, like use cases are the one which are very important to design a system. That's what, like understanding of the system in terms of its representations, and also it defines like what kind of use case it is and what kind of actors are being using this particular use case. So these are all the various representations under. And then the next one is, which is also an important point, under microscope, use cases under microscope. So a definition, a point like this: a use case is a sequence of transactions in a system whose task is to yield results of measurable value to an individual actor of the system. So whatever the task which are being carried out by the actor will be represented as a use case, and those are in the sequences. Like there are two actors, as I told you earlier. If you take any shopping where there will be two users, one is a customer and another one is the shopkeeper. So whatever the conversation or whatever the discussions which will be carried out between these two users, actor 1 and actor 2, nothing but a customer and shopkeeper, all those sequences, all those use cases will be represented as a use case. And then there are key concepts are there under this use case system, which are like what is a use case and what is an actor and what is a system generally. So that's why I'm just showing you here: use case, actor, and what is the system. System is nothing but where the users, nothing but actors and use cases are involving. And then later on the other kind of key concepts like measurable values and transaction. So what is this measurable value? Means a use case must help the actor to perform a task that has some identifiable value. So the point is, whatever the use case which is going to perform with respect to actor should have some specific value, so should have some specific identity, like this particular use case is being used by this actor, or this actor has using these many number of use cases. So that measurable value should be there for use case and as well as actor. And then next point is transaction. A transaction is an atomic set of activities that are performed either fully or not at all. So if you look at there are n number of transactions being taken place while reserving a ticket. I've just taken an example as IRCTC. So while you performing some set of actions, like you will be giving the source and destination and as well as date, then accordingly a transaction will be performed. These are like minor, but if you are going to see the cash transactions, okay, whenever you are submitting your request in this IRCTC and whenever you want to book a ticket, then that is like again a transaction will be performed with respect to bank. So those are the measurable value and transaction. Now coming to the next one, which is use associations. Use associations are the one which occurs when you are describing your use cases and notice that some of them have common subflows. So whenever there is a common kind of representation among your use cases, then it's better to have an association representation. And similarly, the use association allows you to extract the common subflow and make it a use case of it. So as I told, the same again, whenever you are having some common kind of working environment for which you need not to use a different use case, you can have it a simple use case, or possibly you can have some other use cases with a dependency relationship in terms of import and export concern. And then next one is, how can we extend the association? So the extends association is used when you have one use case that is similar to another use case but does it a bit more or is more specialized. So the previous one is same associations, but here you are having one use case and the other use case similar to both the cases, but it is behaving some different kind of working environment. Then obviously you have to extend the association. I'm just giving an example, like A and B are the two use cases, are almost like similar type of use cases, but B is behaving a little different compared to the use case A. Then we have to use the extend association. Now coming to the next one, which is different types in association, or different types in, sorry, not association, it is for use case. What are those different types of use cases? The first one is essential use case, and second one is concrete or real use case, and then third one will be abstract use case. Now coming to the first one, what is essential use case? The name itself says whenever an use case is needed. So I'm just giving a point here. Essential use cases are the one which are expressed in an ideal form and that remains relatively free of technology and implementation details, and the design decisions can be deferred and abstracted, especially those related to the user interface. So whichever are quite important when you are performing a system, then that can be named as essential use cases. And coming to the next one, which is concrete or real use case. This concrete or real use case describes the process in terms of real design are committed to a specific input and output technologies, and then so on. So the concrete and real use cases main usage is to have a real kind of representation, so that can be used under concrete. And the next one is abstract use cases, something like hidden actors. So some actors, if you take some systems where actors will be there but they are hidden, their presence will not be there, but then they will be using the system and they will be representing the system. So in that way those use cases can be referred as abstract use cases. So abstract use case is not complete and has no actor that initiates it, but is used by another use cases. So this is abstract use case. So the thing is abstract use case in the sense which will not be having any kind of actors, but then still it will be initiating and doing some sort of actions in our UML process models. And now the next one is identifying the actors. So how we need to identify the actors means there are a few steps over here. The term actor represents the role of a user plays with respect to the system. As I told like earlier, the person who wanted to use the system, or the person who is ready to use or who is interested to use, then that particular person is called as actor. And when dealing with actors, it is very, very important to think about the roles rather than people or job titles. So we are least bothered about what kind of job they are having, what kind of job titles, and what they are. So we are least bothered in that cases. So our intention is we need to develop a system for a different kind of users. So what are those different users? That alone we have to think. We need not to think the remaining part. And then the actors is as more important as identifying classes, structures, associations, and attributes, and as well as its behavior. So this is also one of the important thing. When we are going to identify the actors, we have to remember that whether the actors are affordable in developing or taking classes, structures, linked with classes, structures, associations, and attributes. Because finally, if you are not considering in a proper actor, then some kind of issues will arise maybe in the later on stages. Now there are few kind of questions which can be answered very easily for identifying the actors. Like the first one is authors can be found through the answers to the following questions: who is using the system? If at all, if it is existing, who is using, and who affected by the system? And the next one is which groups need help from the system to perform a task? And finally, who affects the system? So who affected by the system is different, and who affects the system is different. So these are some of the major questions which every system will have, like what kind of groups are needed some help from the system, and as well as who affects the system and who are affected by the system and who are using the system. So these are all the a few questions which I wanted to tell you. And then now if you look at here, there are another set of questions, like the first one: which user groups are needed by the system to perform the analysis of its functions? And also these functions can be both main functions and secondary function, such as administration. And the next point is which external hardware or other systems use the system to perform tasks. So what that means is what kind of external hardware or what kind of additional hardware components are needed in order to run our system, and then what problems does this application solve. So this is also one of the major point. So for which type of problems you are developing the system, so how can the system can be solved the different types of problems. So that has to be specifically mentioned. And also the next one is how do users use the system, what are they doing with the system. So how the system can be used for the users, and similarly in what percent the users can feel with the system. So all these steps are very much needed while developing a new system. So you have to have a very keen observation with the existing system. So if you look at, there are n number of mobiles are there, different types of mobiles. So each mobile will have its own specifications, and that specifications will be observed by a specific group of people, and that specific group of people may not be going to other mobile in terms of using applications or the system of that mobile or whatever it may be. So identifying the actors is very, very important. And then now the next one is guidelines for finding the use cases. What are the guidelines for identifying use cases? So here are the steps which are involved in finding the use cases. So the first one is, for each actor, find the tasks and the functions that the actor should be able to perform. And similarly, the use case should represent a course of events that leads to a clear goal. So while identifying a system, you will be identifying set of actors, and you should be in a position to identify what are all the tasks which you have to give for each actor. And then the next one is name the use cases. Whatever the number of use cases which you have identified, for each and every use case there should be a unique name. And the third one is describe the use case briefly by applying terms with which the user is familiar. So finally, this makes the description with a less ambiguity. So after identifying the set of use cases for your system, give a unique name and also give some kind of description, and that description should be very crisp. You should not have a detailed description, because again it will be a lengthy one. So try to have a crisp and in a simple way, so that the end user will be knowing what exactly the use case is. And the next one is dividing use cases into packages. So use case represents a particular scenario in the system. And the next one is a design is broken down into packages. So if you look at an example here which I have mentioned as a library system, so various scenarios involve in supplier providing books, or a member doing research or borrowing books. So do research and purchase books. So these kind of elementary aspects can be done in the object-oriented analysis approach. And then coming to the next one, which is developing effective documentation. So this is also one of the important one. Why I can say this is an important one means, if you are not providing an effective documentation, and if you want to define your same process again, maybe after some time, maybe 1 year or something like that, then you itself feel a lot of difficulty and lot of ambiguity in your process if you don't have a clear or complete documentation. So for every system there should be a complete set of documentation process. So what are the major steps, or what are the major things are needed? So a document can serve as a communication vehicle among the project's team members, or maybe the group members, or it can serve as an initial understanding of the requirements. So if you look at many projects where the documentation plays an important factor in making a decision about committing resources. So without having a proper documentation, they will not be going to the further steps. And then the next one is organization conventions for documentations. So what are these steps which are focusing here is, the documentation depends on the organization rules and regulations. So various companies and various benchmarks will have for preparing documentations. So one organization will follow a different kind of a documentation methodology or a framework, and the same cannot be used for other company as well. So, and too little documentation invites a disaster. So don't provide the documentation very less. Even if you are trying to mention, that should be a complete one. And too much documentation is also a danger. So too little and too much documentation is not advisable, because if you are providing lots and lots of documentation, then it will be very very difficult for the users to go through with the whole documentation. So that is what the point which I have mentioned here. Too much documentation transfers energy from the problem solving task to a mechanical and unrewarding activities. So that is one of the important point which you need to remember. And then next one is guidelines for developing effective documentation. So I'm just showing you here a brief guidelines. One is common cover, and then 80 to 20 rule, and then familiar vocabulary, and then make the documentation as short as possible. So don't put too little. You can make the documentation in a very short manner, but if you have completely, then it will be okay, and then organize the document. Now, what is this common cover and what is this 80-20 rule? So generally 80-20 rule, I'm just showing you here, 80% of effort should be there and 20% of testing or whatever it may be result. So even effort contains your all the phases: analysis, design, implementation, coding, testing. Everything should be in terms of effort, and then you are waiting for the result with the 20%. And as I was telling, common cover, you should have a common kind of representation, common kind of font styles, or common kind of representations for diagrams and tables has to be followed. And you have to make everything in an organized way. So you have to have some kind of page numbering and vice versa and all other various things. So these are all the cases which I can tell you under guidelines of developing a documentation. And also you can have a different kind of styling for your documentation representation, but whatever you want to make, it should be understandable for the users. It should be very clear, and there should not be any kind of ambiguity. So these are all the things. So now I'm just concluding what we have seen now in the today's class is object-oriented analysis with the steps like the first one is identifying actors and developing UML activity diagram, the second step, and third one is identifying use cases. I'll just show you in a quick way. Yeah, identifying actors, because this is this particular process cycle is very very important. Identifying actors and developing activity diagram for business process models, and then third one is developing use cases and then interaction diagrams. So even we have discussed one example, one case study here for order application, and then classification will be the next step, and then iterate and refine. So this is one of the topic, and then later on we have seen different use cases and what are the various roles and responsibilities of the actors, and what are the different types of use cases, like something like essential use case, concrete or real, and then the hidden one. So the hidden one is nothing but the abstract use cases. So, and then similarly we saw identifying actors with the different questionnaires, and then guidelines for finding use cases. So these are all the things which we have seen, and finally we ended up with our guidelines for developing effective documentation. So if you have any doubts, please you can ask me. Otherwise, yeah, thank you.